buddy. My name's Doug Reifschneider. No Ken, seen Carl around, Jennifer a couple other times, not just earlier in being. First time I think was Scott, and then yeah, Brent. I think I've seen you on the ITB meetings in the past. So I am a fractional chief marketing officer with a firm called Chief Outsiders. Chief Outsiders target market is typically the small to mid-sized business from the 10 to $200 million, maybe $300 million range. Although recently, with the way things have changed, we've picked up some enterprise clients, and I currently work with a PE firm, et cetera. My background is 30 plus years in the restaurant industry. And as I share the information I'm going to share here in a little bit, you'll see, and sorry, Jennifer, you've seen a lot of it before on Tuesday, that since being a Chief Outsiders, I have not worked with restaurants yet because of the way COVID changed things and whatnot. So I guess without further ado, I'll get into that piece. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the benefits of becoming a fractional executive. And as the more I've thought about it, being whether you call yourself a fractional executive or a freelancer and doing project work and things as an executive level, that's kind of more or less the same thing. It's just mincing words, if you will. So what I wanted to do, though, was today share my journey from trying to become a freelancer into becoming a true fractional executive, and talk about some of the options that are available out there if you're interested. So just share a little bit about me, the restaurant business, and then I am with Chief Outsiders now as a fractional CMO. What I like to reference here, though, is a book that Jim wrote in 2016. He actually started formulating his thoughts and things in 2010, as we learned on Tuesday at the Bing meeting. And he wrote a book called Alligators, Fighting Alligators, as it is. And he pointed out some basic things in the book, and there's a lot more detail, of course, but he noticed very quickly that the workforce was shrinking as boomers were retiring, because as most of us get, not you, Jennifer, but the rest of us are probably 50 plus. As we retire, the workforce is shrinking a little bit. Technology certainly has changed the way we look at things. It's become more of a global economy. And then at the time, in 2016, the U.S. regulations were on the rise, but the economy was slowing. We've seen since that going up and down since then, right? And then the world economy for many years has been evolving from more of an industrial economy to more of an informational type economy. My freelancing journey, so didn't think about calling it a fractional executive at all. Just, hey, I need to be a consultant, I guess is the word. Moved to Marietta from Idaho because I had been out there working for a company called Pita Pit. And when the Canadian group bought the American group, they decided they didn't need 4 or 5 of us VPs and decided to let us go. And so when you're in Idaho and wondering what's next, you move back to where family is. But the problem and the big deal, I think, for sake of this discussion, is that I had no sphere of influence. Moved to the Atlanta area because my parents are here. They're aging. I need to help take care of them, et cetera. But I really didn't know anybody except Jim Weber, because we'd known each other in the past, and a few other folks. But as far as a circle of influence or sphere of influence, it was nothing. I did, thanks to Jim, join ITB and Bing pretty quickly. And I did contact my network, but as we learned on Tuesday in the Bing meeting, I contacted my network, but I didn't necessarily do any follow-ups and things that I should have done to really nurse that network in the restaurant industry to help me find jobs in the restaurant industry or in the Atlanta area. And the other reason, frankly, for moving to Atlanta is that Atlanta has become quite a hotbed of restaurant concepts. I don't know if you guys know, but Inspire Brands is here. They own Jimmy John's and Sonic and Buffalo Wild Wings. Focus Brands is here. They have McAllister's and Moe's and 4 other brands. Global Franchise Group. Crystal is here. There's all sorts of restaurant brands here. And I had some contacts in some of that, but another reason for moving to Atlanta. But in the course of doing 19, moving here, I had the opportunity to present 3 pretty good proposals for, I wouldn't have called it fractional at the time, but project work or, do the marketing for 3 different companies. And I was 0 for 3. Did not work out well for me. So does anybody else have a story? I know, Scott, sounds like you're just new into this. Do you have anything you could share, or does anybody have any thoughts on freelancing in general, or also known as fractional?
Well, I'm just starting. So, but what I found is that a lot of people don't really know the benefits, especially a smaller company, all the value that good HR really brings. And that's really surprising. We might find that also with a CMO, right? What's a really good CMO and what do they bring to the table? So
Right.
part of what I found is just the educating part of CEOs about what fractional HR is and the value and the why you want to have it now versus later and what that foundation means. And I think the other thing is that I've learned just from a BD standpoint is you think that you're so close to nailing the deal when you're just about ready to pop the bottle of wine and it falls through for whatever reason.
Yeah. We've got a saying at Chief Outsiders. I didn't know then, but I know now. To that point, is speaking to your prospect. Your timeline is our timeline.
Yeah,
because it is amazing how proposals or the next discussion, or whatever that was going to be, next week, is crickets for a couple 3 weeks, and sometimes nothing happens, and sometimes they get back to you at times when you would not have ever expected.
Yeah. Well, just a little bit of my story. I actually started freelancing for the first time back in 2016. And it was not really successful, primarily because I didn't focus on it. I was freelancing to do something while I was looking for a job, and I kept most of my time looking for a full-time gig, and wound up getting a full-time position, which was a good thing, but it was also a bad thing because last August, in the midst of COVID, before I even went back to the office, that my job was eliminated. So now I've found that by focusing and just abandoning all hope of getting a full-time job and just focusing on the consulting, I'm getting a much better success rate, much better traction, and enjoying life a lot more.
Well, and you nailed one of the topics here too, Carl, is that looking for a job and then looking for prospects as a freelancer are much the same things. You do a lot of the same tactics, whether you're writing blogs, as Jim's asked for, to contacting your network, make sure the people that know that you are looking for clients, etc. Anybody else want to share?
I might mention, Doug, that I think I have suffered early on and may still suffer from some of what you suggested, which is contacting my network, but not doing a good job of following up. And so it'd be interesting to know how you turn that around. But I'm also curious, is the reason I'm, even though I had another issue this morning to deal with, I'm really curious about this fractional approach that you have in the group that you're part of, and whether there's other groups that would be more in line with what some of the rest of us do.
Yeah, I actually will get to that. Your specific area, I don't know. It would take some research, but that is exactly one of the things I'm sharing near the end. There are a lot of fractional firms that can do what Chief Outsiders do for CEOs, CIOs, HR, etc.
I'll jump in just real quick and say this was with my very first attempt, which ended up lasting for 15 years. I was already thinking about going to my current boss and saying, hey, I would still like to work with you, but not for you anymore. And he had actually, when this was in the process, he had gotten sick and turned the company over to someone else, which unfortunately made the company kind of run into the ground. And it turned out within months, I didn't have any job. I was one of the last people to leave there because of my position, but I had already formulated what I wanted to do and work in ad placement as an ad agency for the record labels. And that's what I was kind of doing for them, but I wanted to expand it more and work directly with the record labels. And I had so many contacts in the industry that I was literally thinking I was going in and going to be meeting with one person, and I would go in and everybody in the executive office would be there at my meeting. And I was kind of caught by surprise the first time that happened. But they were so interested to hear what I was saying because no one was doing what I was proposing. And they were like, "We are not sure how you're going to make money, but if we can use you, we'll use you." Well, it wasn't any guarantee that I was going to get any work from them. But as they needed help with certain projects, they would contact me. And it was usually because someone had dropped the ball and they needed to get ads created and done and placed in a really quick manner. I could jump in and do those things for them. And it turned out working for 15 years until iTunes came along, and that pesky Apple company.
No wonder you've got a Google phone.
It's been the bane of my existence, right? But they ended up kind of reinventing the whole retail market for music. And I was working with individual retailers, getting them co-op ad dollars from the record labels. And so as they started disappearing, there was less work for me. And that's where I decided maybe I shouldn't be in just one industry. I should work in a broader field. So that's why I went into the social media.
Makes total sense.
Yes. Plus, I had done some Google ads. Well, they weren't Google ads back then. They were banner ads through a company called DoubleClick, which Google bought.
I remember DoubleClick. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had done some stuff with that, but the record labels were too slow to catch on to it. That I was just like, I mean, I had great results. DoubleClick was going like, "You had a 10% click-through rate. That's unheard of. 0.5% is considered good." And I'm like going, well, I say, if you like this artist, you're going to like this artist. And it worked out extremely well. But like I said, the labels were too slow to catch on. So I said, but this is a better way to market, instead of a shotgun effect right to the demographic you want.
Absolutely. As a marketer, I can appreciate that. So in doing research for this to prepare for today and Bing meeting on Tuesday, I kind of like, what is freelancing? And because I struggled with it. And as I referenced at the outset, if we're doing the kind of work most of us do, we're really doing fractional work. So fractional and freelancing are kind of synonymous, or consulting. A lot of times when I heard freelancing, I thought of graphic artists, tactical people, not upper level, etc. So I'd suggest, for us, this is not what freelancing is. Going back to Jim's Fighting Alligators book, he listed top 10 activities for finding jobs in the new economy. But if you're looking at finding prospects or clients, it also works. What I like to point out is that items 4, 5, and 6 that I just underlined here, as far as if you've got a resume, cover letter, and business cards, that's one thing. If you're prospecting as a freelancer, you've got basically a one-page summary of what you do, maybe a cover letter and business cards. You should have a website, ideally, or at least access to a website, and you should be doing things on business and social networking sites like LinkedIn. So whether you're looking for a job or looking for prospects, it all fits. So at least 3 of the 10, and you can make an argument that building a team, because when you're networking, you want to really build your team and let like give you an example a little bit to your point, Brent, on the using my network. I've still got one person in my network who's still sending me leads on jobs for full-time W-2 work. And I've come pretty close to saying, I'm pretty happy with Chief Outsiders. I'm going to stick with this fractional thing, right? And so instead of sending me potential leads on a prospect for a fractional thing, it's always the full-time stuff. So I obviously still don't have that figured out, Brent, but there are ways on how you nuance your messaging to your network so they know what to forward to you. Oh, you know what? To the point of earlier before, number 10, professional outgoing voicemail messages. How many of you have an outgoing message on your phone that says what you do today? Are we all good? So, if you're looking for people to call you, you probably ought to make sure it's, mine. Before I preach, I probably should make sure mine's like active, but I did set one that says something like, "Hello." This is my favorite gag with outgoing voicemail. "Hello, you've almost reached Doug Reifschneider, Chief Outsiders." And that does catch people and I get a lot of comments, but I do at least have a message with Chief Outsiders on my phone. And if you don't have that, make sure you do that now, whether you're looking for a job or Good job. I figured you would, Ken. But that's another thing you should think about too. Don't forget the small stuff.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah.
You have two separate phones then?
Say what?
You have a business phone and a personal phone then?
Mine's all together.
Okay, so you just, anybody that knows personally, they know they're still gonna get your business.
Yes, yeah, because I never understood the need to carry two devices.
Yeah, I don't either, but that's why I wondered if you use the outgoing message as a business message, even for personal calls. So
yes, yeah, because frankly, I get more personal calls. I mean, more business calls. I get personal anyway.
No,
The only time I have two devices, like my last job, I was with a pharmaceutical company, and I could not do any business on my personal phone, so I had to have two devices.
It does vary. My brother works for SAIC, which is a very large government contract. They've got like 45,000 employees nationally. He works on the NASA business, and exactly that point, Carl. He has to have he's got a second computer and a second phone for business, because sometimes there's very sensitive, not necessarily top secret with NASA, but sensitive information that they can't have compromised. So yeah, sometimes you don't have the opportunity. In my case, marketing, we're half creative and half data, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and so it's not that sensitive usually. The pros and cons of freelancing, or in our case, we'll call fractional executiveship, is that we are able to pick and choose our clients. We can set our own hours. The downside, I think, is we've all figured out we have to pay for our own business, and sometimes managing multiple clients and projects can be a challenge, but that's not a problem if you're not good at developing your own business. So in my mind, being on your own anyway, which is where I'm headed on how fractional with a firm is a good idea, was finding clients. Back to my 0 for 3 graphic earlier. Just as an information for everybody, I've mentioned Bang. That's the Business Executives Networking Group. It's along with the Great Careers Group. There are some benefits, even if you're an ITB and you're fully employed, or you're fully employed fractionally as well. They've got some educational benefits and things that are worthwhile looking into. So don't want to do a whole pitch for Bing, but just want you to know that Bing is something you may want to look into if you're looking for some additional education on some things. Obviously, we're all ITB partners, to Jim's point, and this is a piece going back to the Fighting Alligators book that works for whether you're looking for a job, you're a fractional person, is having a profile page. You don't want to, you're not sure, how do I make my own website? Well, get a profile page with ITB partners that we all have. If you're a partner, that provides some web presence. As an aside, my grandson had to do a project last year, and for whatever reason, I forgot what the purpose of it was, but they said, let's check your family members and see if anybody has an online presence. And I was the only family member he had that, when he Googled Doug Reifschneider, found a lot of stuff from my LinkedIn profile, my Chief Outsiders profile, my ITB profile, you name it, I was there. And he was very impressed that his grandfather actually had such an online presence when most of the rest of the family did not. So I think you all know all the benefits, and ITB is very inexpensive. I've talked to Jim before and suggested maybe the price should go up, but that's for another story, another show. But he does provide a lot of help. Also in this, and this works with fractional in particular, how do you all set your rates? Those of you do some things. If you go project work, it's one thing. I found this online, and it's basic accounting, basic math, but they suggested you figure out what your minimum acceptable rate is, or MAR, M-A-R. And they used an example of a person that has about $7,000 in expenses to run their household. That's $84,000 a year. If you want to actually take home a salary, which isn't much, but 25%, that's $21K. So the cost of doing business is about $105,600. If you want to just break even, have a minor salary and cover your expenses, you're looking at $74 an hour. Now, I'd suggest, because when you're fractional, it means you're usually working fractional for them, but you're also fractional for you, that needs to be upped a bit to cover for your downtime. How do you guys look at setting your rates?
Well, for me, I don't have set rates. It's from proposal to proposal and client to client. I got one of the consultants I work with sort of defines what is in the budget for me, and I can either say yes or no. But usually I'll start with an estimate of how much time a project will take and what my basic hourly rate is, and provide a flat rate for the project based on that.
Yeah, because yours is pretty project heavy, right?
Yeah.
And that would make sense in research. I mean, if you, to your point, if what I'll call a mid-sized company was interested in forming a research function, and I had a client like that, it would be logical to potentially bring you in and have you work as a fractional researcher. But still would be like a 90-day project, but you'd help them set up the infrastructure for doing internal, external research function within their company. Right.
Yep. But I would base the rate. I would just quote a flat rate, so much for the project.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So what I've looked at in terms of, what other companies are doing for what I want to do on a retained basis is just a retention fee for a dedicated 1 day a week. And obviously if the month has 3 weeks or, 4 weeks or 5 weeks, it doesn't matter, but the same rate every month, and do it on a retention basis so that I'm dedicated in that person's office or remote for that company 1 day a week. And then the other days of the week, if there's any, quick questions that need to be answered or emergencies that I need to jump on, then it's just incorporated within that one rate. And what I'm trying to do is maybe do that for 2 or 3 different companies, and have that retained, agreement in place.
Brent?
Well, what I did I've been a consultant for almost 30 years, part-time or full-time, and always depended on whether I was working for another company or what have you. So, early on, I guess 30 years ago, I just picked $100 per hour out of the air and started with my first client and worked with them for 10 years until I went to work for the government and couldn't do consulting. But more recently, what I went to do was, I like this minimum acceptable rate, but what I did was look up how you convert your salary that you last made into a consulting rate. And so there's multiple equations out there, but the most common ones factor in whatever you want to consider was your gross salary, and then how many weeks of vacation to factor in, what the benefit rate would be. And then you can get a range. And so I actually, because this comes up a lot of potential clients that I've had, if they don't want to have a long-term, like a retention, like Scott mentioned, or a project-based fee, they want to kind of test the waters on an hourly basis. They don't understand what that hourly rate really should be and where it comes from. So I developed a spreadsheet that shows them a scale of, well, if you paid somebody $50,000 a year, all the way down to, or all the way up to, if you paid them $400,000 a year, what that would translate into an hourly basis, not just by dividing the total by the number of and all the benefits and everything.
Yep.
And that helps sometimes, but then other times they still have sticker shock.
Yeah. Jennifer, are you more of a W-2, or are you based on the gigs as a fractional wine consultant, or are you more of a full-timer?
Independent, but I believe I filled out a W-2.
Okay. So you don't have to worry about, like, when you do a tasting, you don't have to worry about figuring out what you're going to charge. You guys have set like rates or fees?
Tastings are actually free to customers.
Just a good old boy. Oh,
sorry.
Who is that?
I'm sorry. What did you say, Doug?
Nothing. I don't remember. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we covered that pretty well because Brent, you brought up what Jim volunteered the other day and that take the salary and then do the math and add the benefits, etc. So, really taking this a step further, fractional executive as a career option. I investigated chief outsiders at the end of 2019. If I remember, my journey ended, or I shared what happened in 2019. Started looking at chief outsiders in 2019 and actually started working with chief outsiders as a 1099. They don't hire. We're not on salary. We do still have to it's an eat what you kill thing. But we have managing partners whose sole job is to find jobs for us or find engagements for us. So that helps a bunch. I just ended up joining in basically January of 2020, went through my onboarding in February and our national meeting in March, which was a great 1-2 punch to meet other chief outsiders, think about how to do business development, all that sort of stuff. And I hung my shingle on like March 6th, 2020. And with the thought that I was going to help vet out the restaurant industry, the restaurant business for chief outsiders. All right. So we all know, as mentioned earlier, how the restaurant business was hit pretty hard by COVID. And this that I'm showing you on screen right now was how I was introduced to what we call the tribe at Chief Outsiders when I first was on one of our biweekly calls in probably was mid to late February of 2020. We list our key experiences, our expertise, our passions, and we get to, share a few things. What I would just, the words, a lot of marketing words on here. What I would ask you to look at here is my key experiences, how very, very restaurant focused. Pita Pit USA spent 11 years at Firehouse Subs, helped build them from 230 locations to over 1,000. And then did a lot of other stuff all on the restaurant side for 30 plus years. All right. So that made me have to pivot and do some things. But I just want to go back to the piece on one of the reasons I joined Chief Outsiders, but I knew they would help increase my online presence. We already talked about that for ITB. And then with the, COVID, it really flipped me around. So throughout the year, it became pretty obvious that I was having trouble getting restaurant clients. And I don't know if all of you know, did you realize that from an economic perspective that COVID was not the only thing that drove the economy in the ground in March, April, May of 2020? There was what they call a double black swan event because oil prices were going through like all-time lows. All right. So you add that to COVID. That's what really shook things up. Was also at the time when they determined, the financial people said this, Wall Street's no longer connected to Main Street. Main Street retail, brick and mortar in particular, with COVID was nosediving in sales and revenues, right? And if you're a B2B company and you could switch and produce personal protection equipment, you were fine. But if you couldn't, you might be toast. So we've all lived through it. You guys all probably have your own pain points with COVID. But understand from a marketing perspective, in my target audience of restaurants, I just wasn't working. And it's important to remember, if you haven't figured out, like the digital presence is more important than ever, whether you're looking for a job or as a fractional executive. The adoption of technology was expedited 1,000-fold, especially in a place like the restaurant industry. So we were talking about big data earlier. Restaurants for years, we didn't know who visited us, right? Until the pizza guys knew where they were delivering pizza. But until apps and loyalty platform became something where restaurants, some smart restaurant people decided they needed to have some first-party data beyond maybe an email database, started doing that. But look at all the brands you probably saw somewhere that added an app in 2020 or 2021 in restaurants, right? Technology was adopted in every industry, particularly in restaurants. And then I think we all know virtual meetings and work from home continue to change the dynamics of whether we're engaging, employer-employee relationship, whatever. And hopefully Jim will talk at the end on, maybe we'll go back to a face-to-face meeting with ITB in the future. So I'm sharing my internal positioning statement within Chief Outsiders, otherwise known as my value proposition. That's marketing terms, because initially it was about helping restaurant companies. And even though I mentioned that Main Street was hurt too, all retail businesses were hurt, still was obvious that I could help a multi-location business like a eye care center or doctor's offices or dental clinics or anything that's got multi-location. That's how I had to pivot internally, so that the managing partners, the Chief Outsiders who are tasked with finding business for Chief Outsiders, would know what to consider me for when they came up with certain opportunities. That's the reason for sharing this particular statement. So now I suggested you look at my key clients from before, or key experience. Now I have not had one restaurant client. Orange Coast Winery, though, I'm in an advisory role. They do sell food. They are in Orange County in California, but unfortunately, they've been closed. They still haven't reopened because of some permitting and other issues that are going on with their business. But all the other things here are not related to even multi-location business, because the good news about marketing is that we can translate a lot of the things we do, like brand positioning and value proposition creation, can be done for any brand, for business to business, business to consumer, et cetera. Key thing to, the benefit of fractional executives is that it's flexible for both us and the customer. It reduces risk for the customer because they can buy into a smaller number, because basically it's an affordable way to get high priced talent for the fraction of a full-time cost. Kind of to Scott's point, we do most of our pricing based on deliverables. And we start with, okay, if you want a fractional CMO, if you're going to use them 1 day a week or 20% of their time, it costs, roughly this much. That's how we look at it too, for more of a retention fee or a flat fee. And it may be on a monthly basis if it's a 3-month project or 6-month engagement, et cetera. But that's how we look at it. So, and this, Scott may help answer some questions you have, or even Brent. There were 2 paths to becoming a fractional executive. So I tried it as a freelancer in 2019. I chose to join Chief Outsiders because I've mentioned the managing partners are developing business for us. We are collectively called the tribes. The tribe at Chief Outsiders, there's awesome power within us, because if I've got a question or don't know something, I can throw a question on email or go into an intranet called Bloomfire and ask a question, and I'll usually get a response with 3 to 4 hours and numerous responses within a day. I also have a profile page on the Chief Outsiders website, have access to use HubSpot, which is a CRM platform. Got access to other digital tools like SEMrush and SpyFu and things if you're into digital marketing, which is important for us marketers. And then there's the single shingle, where the biggest advantage of being what we call a single shingle as a fractional executive or consultant is you keep the full share of income, right? It goes back to the calculation we talked about doing before. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely sharing, especially if they're getting me the work, because we've got selling, sourcing, and working commissions within Chief Outsiders, and those numbers all add up to a number. Well, if you're a single shingle, you got 100%. I don't get 100%, but 100% of nothing is nothing, which is what I found in 2019. Right? And 2020 was tough. I did not have as many clients, and things were still tight even with Chief Outsiders in 2020. But 2021, I've been 70 to 90% utilized most of the year.
Doug, in Chief Outsiders, do you have the flexibility of doing your work on your own also, or are you sort of dedicated to?
We are dedicated to us. So anything I would do has to come through Chief Outsiders, like side hustles or side gigs, whatever. If it was something unrelated to marketing consulting, probably, because I did form an LLC, which you don't have to do, but I did. But good question. In general, we agree to 2 things. One is not to use Chief Outsiders as a holding pattern while you're looking for a full-time job.
Right.
And then to have everything go through Chief Outsiders. Now, that said, we've probably had a half a dozen CMOs get hired by their clients in the last 6 or 9 months. And that's not frowned upon. That's, applauded.
Yeah.
When a client says, man, you've been in fractional for us for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, but Matt, we like you so much, we need to bring you in-house. And trust me that I don't know if deals are cut or not, but the Chief Outsiders headhunting rate, I guess from Jim's perspective, the recruiting rate is pretty high, a lot higher than Jim would charge if he was going to hire a CMO for one of those firms that we were doing the fractional stuff for. So the companies must really want us when they bring us on board.
Hey, Doug, did you have to pay to join this group, 1, and 2? Do they just charge a flat percentage of whatever the ultimate fee paid by the client is?
So total disclosure, we've got a couple of plans. So yes, I did pay a fee to get in. It was a minor, what I'll call a 4-figure fee. It was not, like $100,000 franchise fee. There is no monthly recurrence other than, so if I don't have any work, they don't make any money. I don't either. As an associate, which is what I am, because I got a slow start, I'll be very transparent. Whatever the fee we charge, I keep 50%. They keep the other 50. If I hit certain thresholds to become a partner, that 50 becomes 60. But the same thing goes, whereas if I sell and source, or if I source and sell my own work, now I'm going to go from 50 to 65. So that's 15 points. And if I source and sell work for some other CMO, which is encouraged, if I'm doing good business development, I get what we call mailbox money, and I've got 15% coming in for nothing after they start working the gig. All right. So whether the numbers are exactly right and all that, I don't even want to try to like argue with them because it's what I signed on for. But yeah, there is a pretty hefty, 50 or 40 or 50% commission, but you've got to pay for HubSpot. You've got to pay for the internet. You've got to pay for a lot of things that is what I'd call fixed costs with the Chief Outsiders model. And not all other fractional executive firms follow exactly the same thing. Because like sales acceleration, I'm going to mention here in a bit, they've got a different model. I think they have more of a subscription model, but I haven't gotten into the details with my friends who are in that particular group. But I know several sales acceleration sales professionals.
Yeah, there are other models out there, a couple local. What is it? The Global Resources Professionals, which is a spinoff from one of the big four accounting firms. I think might have been Deloitte. You're actually an employee and you're paid an hourly rate, but if they don't have a gig for you, you're, essentially sitting on the bench. They do provide, health benefits and all, but again, they've got to have a gig for you. And there's another one locally here that's Tech CXO, I think, that is sort of the same model. So there's a lot of different models out there, from the employee model to more what the Chief Outsiders is all about.
Yeah, I think Insperity, which is an HR firm I mentioned to Scott earlier, I think they may be more of an employee type situation. So as an example, kind of going on to that, to answer part of Brent's question. So there are what I'm consider four major fractional executive firms, and that may not be fair. These just happen to be the firms that Chief Outsiders has strategic alliances with, because we do a lot of B2B business, which is why the gentleman on the bottom right, Dan Mahoney, is with Sales Acceleration. And he, along with Stephen, who's with B2B CFOs, those are your chief financial officers, and then Jennifer Montaleneko, I'm not sure how she says her last name, is with Insperity, which is an HR firm. But they have actual offices here in Atlanta, like 3 or 4 of them. But we had a call last week. We have one this afternoon. So we're thinking about putting a workshop together that we will invite certain CEOs to, or as many CEOs as we can get invitations to do a workshop on how to work with fractional executives on these 4 different disciplines. I did a Google search of fractional executives, fractional CFOs, fractional sales, fractional IT, et cetera. And these are just a sampling. So Brent, just hit Google and start looking for stuff. I don't know, in your discipline, it's probably going to be a little harder to find because you're pretty niche with animal welfare and things that you mentioned, right? Yes. But to answer your question, for most people, there's probably something out there that one could fit into if you research it and they allow you. Now, one thing that was shared with us on Tuesday was somebody went through a pretty lengthy process with, might have been TopTel, because he was a CEO. And he found out that they look at a lot of people and don't let that many in each year. And I was surprised to learn when I was finished with my onboarding class that the Chief Outsiders folks said, hey, we've onboarded, I think he said 12 people this year, and in 2020, and actually he meant 2019 because it was early 2020, but we onboarded 12 people in the last 12 months, and we looked at like over 1,000. And that made me feel pretty special because when I talk to my peers at Chief Outsiders, when I look at their backgrounds and their profile pages on chiefoutsiders.com, I feel like I'm like the dumbest guy in the room. I am surrounded by smart people. But that is one of the things that Chief Outsiders tries to vent out. We don't want the person that thinks they're the smartest person in the room. That's part of our culture. We want to be humble. We want to be smart. We want to work hard. We want to get, please our clients, but we don't want to be the the guy that tells you how smart he is. And they do recruit around that. So each of these firms may have their own kinds of cultures that you may or may not fit into, even when you find one that might work for you. But there are a lot of them out there. So if you're interested in fractional and having some, it's what I call joining Chief Outsiders was consulting with backup. Frankly, that's what it all is. But there's a cost for it.
So, Doug, what would be the size of the typical client for Chief Outsiders, either in sales volume or people or whatever?
Yeah, the elevator pitch, Jim, is the 10 or 15 million up to 200 or 300 million. So call it 10 to 300. But like a couple of my clients right now are 50 million. But my winery client I mentioned earlier, he's barely $1 million with COVID. He might be $2 million without it, but he's $1 million without. And we've got enterprise clients too. Like we had an 18-month engagement that 4 CMOs were working on with a large healthcare supplier in a given state, one of the big blue ones, if you know what I mean. And that was, I don't know how many millions of dollars of business they do in healthcare. So it does vary, but our target is usually small to mid-sized businesses from the 10 to 300 million. And I had to fine tune my target to, if I'm going after restaurants, that's where I realized that, okay, any restaurant chain with like 200 plus restaurants, and it's going to depend on their sales per unit, is already going to have a marketing function. The restaurant companies that may need a fractional marketing person are going to be the ones that are 25, 30, 50, 100 restaurants maybe, and they've got some junior level people and need some senior level help.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other opportunity is for sort of an interim executive also. Mm-hmm. Somebody's out for a certain period of time with a medical issue, or I don't know, maybe they're National Guard or something, they get called away. So
maternity.
Yeah, that might be an opportunity also. But as you know, it's kind of funny that I just finished up a chief marketing officer search for a client that had been a client of Chief Outsiders.
Yeah, that was a unique small world.
Yeah, very small world.
So that's the end of what I had to share today, trying to keep us on time. Any other questions or thoughts on this? Because I guess I'd netted out that being a fractional executive can be very worthwhile. You can kind of pick your clients. You kind of pick the time you want to work. I say that kind of because, as referenced earlier in our pre-discussion, I've got a couple clients have been asking for more than they paid for, perhaps. And I've worked some weekends and nights that I really didn't plan on it. So I kind of be careful for what you wish for. I went from famine to feast. But my wife would prefer we have more feast. So we're going to keep looking.
Doug, could you clarify something for us? I'm really familiar with the fractional CFO, for instance.
Yeah.
And in those cases, those folks will work, over an extended period of time with their client because, they need a CFO, but they just can't afford one based on the size company they are. Mm-hmm. So they might work with them, 1 day a week or, some other fraction, but it's over years. And, that was my first introduction to the fractional executive. Are there very many folks at Chief Outsiders that are performing that kind of a role, or is it more of a, specific project time period kind of a thing?
So we've got a guy that's done the interim thing. Oddly enough, for a European company, I think it was Switzerland. Over there, they have longer maternity leave, to your point, Carl. So I think 6 months. So he's actually a 6-month interim for a European company, which, time changes are fun to work with. I don't envy him. But the answer, Jim, to your question is yes, but very few. So most of our engagements tend to be 3 to 6 months long. That's our ideal engagement. And typically, if part of being that fractional person is to help set up the marketing organization, our goal, at least on marketing, is not to be around forever, because we want to set the client up for success and help them put in whatever structure they need on our way out. And then, because a lot of our engagements go from like a full-time thing for 6 months, then maybe advisory for 6 months to help advise that in place senior level director, VP, CMO person that we helped hire. And we don't necessarily help hire per se, we put in the org chart.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Any other questions for Doug?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Doug. So you said the ideal engagement is 3 to 6 months. And so, I mean, Scott earlier talked about a retention process that he wanted a retention fee approach. And I've used that once or twice. If you're doing a 3 to 6 month, I assume that's a flat fee, but then, so I'd like you to address that, but then
sure.
you mentioned them wanting more. And I've had a situation like that as well, where they wanted more. And it wasn't always easy to help them understand, well, the more was outside of what they already paid for.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those tough discussions you have to have. But to answer your first question, we now develop proposals based on work streams. So work stream might be review the website and make recommendations for a better one. And then the second part of that work stream might be help develop a new website. Okay. Another one might be develop the marketing organization. So we base it on deliverables, and we have to back into it with how much time we think it's going to take. But let's say I've got a 3-month engagement and they want to do 4 things that we'll call 4 work streams. And that's going to take 1 day a week of my time or 20% of my time. We charge roughly, and it does vary by CMO and a whole bunch of other stuff, but I'll just for round numbers, about $10,000 for, 1 day of our time. And it ends up coming out to, golly, about $300 an hour. So we are more pricey than that single shingle. And that's the advantage of single shingle. You keep 100%, plus you're going to be able to underprice most of these firms like Chief Outsiders, because there's some kind of built-in cost and commissioning going on in the background, right? So nobody can afford $50,000 a month, but we have had some projects where a CMO goes on and they want 80 or 100% of their time, and they're locked into that one client, and that could take the 3 or 6 months. And that's going to be a much higher price tag. So, but it's all in the end based. We try to meet the clients, the prospects where they are, and provide them either a project basis or a fractional or an interim CMO, whatever they need. And because of our pricing, but because of our resources and background, we sometimes do a thing we call chunk the ask. So we realize, the client wants 60%. They only want to pay for 10. So for 10, we could do this, and we could do that in 30 days. If you want it done fast, right? So we try to meet them where they are to make sure it works. And then as far as scope creep, as a client of agencies for many years in the restaurant business, I guarantee you my agencies did not like me because I creeped that scope a lot, or my team did. And that is a hard discussion to have on, hey, we said we would do these 4 things. You've now asked us to do 5. And, in the spirit of cooperation, we did that. But now the 6th thing, it's going beyond. We need, it's going to take us more time. This is that. We're going to have to charge you more, or we won't do it. And you don't say it that way, but you've got to massage it appropriately, right? But that's the tough discussion you have to have.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Well, the appealing piece to me was, Doug, that you've got somebody else out there drumming up business for you. That's appealing.
Yeah, exactly. Because in the end, even though I'm a marketing guy, I don't really like to sell.
Yeah, same here.
Right. But networking is not necessarily about selling. It's about developing relationships, which is what you should do with your network. Right. And I think Jim could probably talk to us a lot on how the right and wrong ways to network. It's not about, hey, what can you do for me? It's more about what can I do for you? How can I help you? And that's where, Richard, forgot his last name, Jim. Richard
Kirby.
Yeah, I did have it right. Richard Kirby, who does executive coaching. At the end of every time he speaks, and usually even at the end of his intros on these things, he'll say, what can I do for you? And everybody can have a free 15-minute consultation or whatever. And that's where, whether you're prospecting for a new job or prospecting for a new client, that's a really great way to keep things moving and ingratiate people to you.
Of course, the networking is incredibly important. It's awfully time consuming and very inefficient. That's why I really encourage people to, contribute to our blog post because that goes out to, you know, an incredible number of people that are exposed to, you know, you and your work, and is a much more efficient way of generating interest. And the other thing to do is to, you know, find people that are looking for speakers, and that you can speak to a group. You know, everybody's looking for somebody to improve their meeting, and they can come in and provide a perspective that might be new and different to them. So, you know, those are three very powerful ways to build your presence and establish your brand.
Agreed. Thank you guys for your patience.